Do you have any quick tactical advice for hardware founders out there looking to get started?
Yeah, so this might be a little broader than hardware, but some really good advice that I got early on in my entrepreneurial journey is
Welcome to Founders Flow. I'm Matt Zopner, founder and CEO of Currents. On today's podcast, Jason Plant, co-founder and CEO of Hydrophos Solutions. Learn how Jason leverages startup competitions to win non-dilutive funding. I'm excited to learn more about the company you're building, Hydrophos, as well as some other entrepreneurship endeavors you've been in. But before that, I know that you've started a few companies. So what was the first leap that you took?
yeah, great question. I would say my entrepreneurial journey started when I was in high school and I got the chance to kind of do two things at the same time that made me realize I wanted to be an entrepreneur. One was taking an entrepreneurship class and learning about this concept of social entrepreneurship. It just seemed like the ultimate win-win scenario where you can make profits and grow an organization, but at the same time scale your impact. To me, that just seemed like the easiest decision in the world to do that. And at the same time, when I was in high school, I was fully online. So homeschooled online before COVID. But during this, I got a ton of freedom and flexibility that just made my life so much better. It gave me time for my health. It gave me time for sleep. It allowed me to design my life around what I wanted and not around the typical school day or later the typical 9 to 5. And so my very first foray into entrepreneurship was it's almost embarrassing to say, but I bought candy before Halloween and I went door to door and I would sell people candy for Halloween because I noticed that a lot of people forget to buy candy and then the kids come to their door and they feel like a bad person. So that was my very first business. It did not really go anywhere. But then in college, my first real business came about with Hydrophos, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's kind of where I got my humble beginnings.
Yeah, and I'm sure being homeschooled sort of gave you an advantage that other kids might not have had. Maybe you were watching YouTube videos or reading blogs about starting companies. A lot of people get their early start through things like drop shipping or Amazon or selling lemonade when they're 10 years old. So it's great to hear that you were doing the candy hustle, which is pretty funny. So I know that you've also started a solar installation company. I would love to hear a little bit more about that. I know it's related to Hydrophos in sort of your career so far because of this social impact space. Could you quickly highlight why you started the solar installation company?
Yeah, so there's two kind of big things again that came together for me starting the company. First was that, my main first venture, Hydrophos, was still in the research and development phase, and I wanted to make a living being an entrepreneur, but Hydrophos wasn't quite there yet. So I needed to start kind of like a profitable, very low barrier to entry type of business. But I didn't know what I wanted to do for that until I saw that my mom got a solar estimate that was egregiously high, shockingly high. I didn't know anything about the solar business at the time, but I knew that this was way too much to charge somebody for what it was. And they were telling her she was going to get this big return on investment. But after I dug into the numbers at the price they were charging, it was not as much as they were promising. And around the same time, my girlfriend's brother, Caden Burns, he was learning how to do solar installations. So we kind of naturally came together. I had the business experience. Caden had the technical experience in actually doing the installations and knew all of the details about the technology. And we formed this business to make solar actually affordable for
Yeah.
the everyday homeowner. And our very first customers were both of our moms. and we solved that problem for them, which was really rewarding and super grateful for them that they kind of gave us that opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I'm sure some of the learnings there translate over to a hardware focused business like Hydrophos. So before we get into that a little bit, can you explain what Hydrophos is and sort of the solution that you're bringing to the table?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main problem, there's kind of two problems that we're trying to solve with hydrophos. The first is the issue of eutrophication, where for listeners that are not familiar, it's basically when too many nutrients get into our bodies of water and they cause these very dense algal blooms. And it's not actually the algae that's the problem, but when that algae dies, there's a certain bacteria that eats the algae and it also consumes all of the oxygen in the water. So that kills everything in there. It
Yeah.
makes it unhealthy to swim in the water. It causes methane emissions. It has all of these problems associated with it. And the main cause of eutrophication is actually runoff from wastewater treatment plant, discharge from wastewater treatment plants, whatever you want to call it. And then the second largest problem with it is actually runoff from agricultural sites where, there's too much quick release fertilizer applied to a farm, and then there's a big rain that comes and sweeps all of those nutrients into our bodies of water. And so hydrophos actually addresses both sides of what causes eutrophication. And basically, our solution is that we're developing filtration technology that takes the phosphorus out of the wastewater in an affordable way with regulatory compliance. And we've tried to design it to be very low labor, very low energy for the wastewater treatment plants. And then what we do with that phosphorus, we actually get the phosphorus in a form where we can sell it back into the fertilizer industry, which is currently suffering from the global phosphorus shortage as a result of unsustainable mining practices. And so there's a whole bunch of kind of issues that our venture has the opportunity of addressing. And yeah, we're really excited about it. We are about to launch our first small scale pilot in December. So uh,
Congrats. That is very
thank you.
exciting. Obviously, you saw a sort of a niche solution in a really big space. I'm sure it can translate to other sort of chemicals out there. I do have a friend in the wastewater industry, and he's building filters for PFAS and other materials. So it's
Yep.
great to see all the solutions out there. I feel like a lot of people don't focus on the water space that much. And so it's great to see that there is some unique solutions coming out. But as we all know, hardware is a really difficult business to get into. It's quite different from software. And so one of the things I'm interested to hear more about your ability to get some financing. So especially with hardware, there's a lot of upfront capex. Hardware is just costs a lot to build and iterate on. And I know that you wanted to bring this topic to the table today, which is how to win non-dilutive financing. It sounds like you're somewhat of an expert in winning competitions and getting grants. So if for those that are not familiar, when you start a company, you have to obviously get some money somehow. There's a couple ways to do it. You can either bootstrap, say from a 9 to 5 job, you can raise capital from investors for equity, you can win grants from the government, but there's also this other path, which is non-dilutive financing from competition. So they don't take equity, they give you cash, and you might be getting them something in return, but it is a really interesting path that not many people know about. So I'd love to hear about that. Tell me, how did you first get into these competitions?
Yeah, so actually, our company was originally founded as an entrepreneurship competition entry. As you can kind of imagine, it's a big idea for somebody who's like 20 years old to be thinking about. And so we didn't really see it as like this is a business that we could really do until we started entering it into a few competitions and actually winning some money and realizing that with this money that we're getting, we could actually start developing a product here and make a difference in these problems like we had always hoped. And so the first competition we did was called the Social Venture Innovation Challenge. It was for New Hampshire entrepreneurs, which is where we're from. And the prize was a modest 30, I think $3,500 that we won, but it was all the confidence in the world that we needed to kind of go out and start pursuing this in the real world. And that's kind of the hope for these kind of undergraduate collegiate entrepreneurship competitions is if you can inspire just a few of the many students who compete to actually pursue their idea, then all of that usually donor funded money becomes worth it. And so I think our venture can kind of be seen as a success story in that space.
So tactically, how does it work? Are these just college sort of competitions, or are there other ones for maybe early stage founders? I know there's a lot of philanthropy videos out there, a lot of capital flowing around in the social impact space. So tell me a little bit more about the types of competitions.
Oh yeah, there's plenty that are not specific to college students, but of course, since we were college students, we were like, okay, let's compete in the small pond before we go to the big pond. And so that's exactly what we did. And the way that they work is relatively simple. You usually submit an application that's some form. It's usually like an abbreviated business plan, a pitch deck, and often they'll ask for a video explaining what your business does. And one thing I always tell people about these competitions is once you start doing them, they become progressively easier because a lot of times they ask the same questions. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying copy paste your answers, but you can have kind of a strong base to build from, and it makes it very time efficient to keep applying for these competitions. So, once you do the first one, you're going to be like, I don't want to do 30 more of these. But believe me, once you've done like 3 to 5, it gets a lot easier.
Yeah. And so, in terms of applying for these, is there a website out there, or do you just have to go and build a spreadsheet of all the competitions?
There may be a list out there, but we basically built a spreadsheet, and I'm happy to
Okay,
send that to anybody that reaches out to me. It was hard to to find everything.
great. We can include that in the notes. I'm curious, not sure if you'll be willing to share this, but I'm wondering what your special sauce is. Is it just the fact that Hydrophos is such a great idea? Is it you tailoring the messaging to the competition? What do you think it is?
Yeah, kind of the framework that I've developed over my relatively short time doing these competitions is that in a pitch you need two things to be successful. And same thing for written submission, same thing for video submission. And those two things are impact potential. So basically having a grand vision, and that means both, the social environmental impact and also how big your company can get and how many lives it can kind of affect there. And then the other side is what I call feasibility. So
Mm-hmm.
it's awesome to have a grand vision, but if nobody believes that you can achieve it, then they're not going to invest or give you the prize in the competition or whatever it may be because they just simply don't believe that it can happen. And so that may sound kind of reductive or simplistic to bring it down to
Mm-hmm.
these two concepts, but every time I'm watching a pitch and it's unsuccessful, including pitches that we've done in the past, I will notice that it's weak in one of those areas. And so either you're not getting the so what element of, if this succeeds, so what? Is it going to be $1 billion company? Is it going to cure a disease? Like, what's the so
Mm-hmm.
what? Or they're not addressing the feasibility. And so, one thing I would just quickly say about the feasibility element is that, especially when you get started doing any kind of pitch competitions or talking to investors, it's going to be scary, the questions that they might ask you. But the absolute best thing that you could do is be very upfront about kind of the holes in your business and don't even wait for the Q&A for them to ask because that gives them time to feel doubt. So what you do is once you kind of have done a few of these, you know the questions that you're going to get asked about your business. You know where people start poking around, and what you want to do is proactively address those points in your pitch so that A, it doesn't feel like a hole, and B, to the extent that it does feel like a hole, your investor or your competition judges that you're talking to are going to feel like you've thought it through and you have a plan. And to me, that's a big thing that separates like a professional grade pitch from someone who's just getting started is I know my business inside and out. We've thought about every angle and here's how we're addressing it. I understand you don't always have time to go into the nitty gritty of everything, but to the extent that you can, do it. And if you don't have a lot of time, just pick the really big issues that would be the most concerning and proactively address those. But that's one big thing that I would say on getting that feasibility element for sure.
These are great insights. People should definitely be taking some notes because this is true for any early stage founder, despite being in a competition or actually pitching to real VCs or accelerators like Y Combinator, Clean Tech Open, those. It's all about storytelling in the beginning. You might not have any hardware, you might not have a platform built at all, but you need to speak to a bigger issue and then bring it down to earth a little bit. So those 2 points are well taken. Before we head out, I want to learn more about your next milestones for Hydrophos and sort of where you see the future of the company going. So I know you're starting your first pilot project, but let's speak to the bigger idea here. Where do you think the next 5 years of Hydrophos are going to look like?
Yeah, so I definitely think we've taken a rather untraditional path with kind of an infrastructure-based venture, looking for non-dilutive funding and trying to bootstrap and whatnot. But I really think that the next steps for us, building this startup, the whole long-term strategy for go-to-market has been, let's get a small concept and then some data. And then that data justify funding for the next step. And then you go on and on and on. So we've gotten lab tests, and that data has suggested that we should move forward with this particular way of addressing our mission, this particular technology. And now we're going to the small scale pilot, which will be a real world application collecting more data. And then that data will again justify that there's good reason for exploration into a larger scale pilot. And with this larger scale pilot, our hope is for that to be a paid pilot project. And another core part of our strategy, which I think any kind of circular economy venture should think about, is we're taking our venture to Florida. And the reason is because if you're running a circular economy company where you're kind of turning waste into gold, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want the waste that you're getting ideally to be geographically close to who you're selling it to, because that cuts down on a whole bunch of distribution and even sometimes storage costs as well. And so for us, Florida is where the phosphate fertilizer industry lives in the US predominantly. And it's also where these extremely large wastewater treatment plants with county-wide kind of flows coming in. And so that's another thing that we think about a lot with location strategy for an infrastructure-based circular economy startup. And so our plan is kind of once we do that large-scale pilot, that will kind of open the floodgates for the market to say, now we've proven it in a real large-scale application just like yours, right? And another thing that we're working on is our filtration medium. It's a substance called biochar. Probably hear about it a lot in kind of the sustainability and clean tech space. But what we're thinking is we may be able to take our phosphorus enriched biochar product and actually sell it back to our suppliers who already have channels to sell a biochar based fertilizer, but our product would be a premium product because we've enriched it with phosphorus. So now you can actually have a biochar that's kind of specialized in the way that a phosphate fertilizer would be, but it's very sustainably produced and it's a much more affordable product, especially in the long term as prices rise. And so that may not have been a crazy coherent answer, but that's kind of some of the things that we're thinking about in the next, say, 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. That's truly a circular venture if you're using some of your suppliers as your customers and then them as distribution channels. So it sounds like there's a nice network effect going on there. Thank you for that answer. And one more thing, do you have any quick tactical advice for me to get started?
Yeah, so this might be a little broader than hardware, but some really good advice that I got early on in my entrepreneurial journey is you need to think about the WIFI. And what's the WIFI? That's it stands for what's in it for you. This has really helped me with just about everything that I've done in my entrepreneurial career. Is you may have started your venture for a given reason, especially in kind of the social impact space. You're going to be starting your venture because you got a mission. Well, that mission is not necessarily the mission of your customer or your investor or even your employees in some cases. And so you have to think about, what does this person really care about? And so in our customer discovery and in our conversations with investors and potential early employees, this is something that I am constantly thinking about, is what motivates this person and how can our interests kind of align for a win-win solution. And so that's how we've kind of come up with these ideas like, well, we'll sell the biochar back to our suppliers because we know that they want to have some differentiation in their space. And so by talking to people and really focusing in on what matters to them, you can learn these insights that will make it a lot easier to close deals, get customers, get investors. Really, to me, that's kind of the core skill of being an entrepreneur, is how do you align all of these different interests from different stakeholders towards the success of your venture and towards the success of your mission.
There's a lot of wisdom in that nugget, Wi-Fi, which I will be taking and using on my own companies. This has been great to learn, and we'll definitely get that list of competitions for non-dilutive financing in the show notes. And if anyone wants to chat with Jason, we'll have his email there as well in the show notes. So thanks so much, Jason, for taking the time.
Thank you. It was a great time.